So here, I represent you a podcast with two professionals demons. So stay tuned, and with this podcast, and for better experience, use headphone and subscribe for my dedicated hard work. And now, onwards, we are streaming our podcast or videos on Spotify platform. Go there and listen. Link is in description.
All right, so we're back for another deep dive, and you guys have really outdone yourselves this time.
Seriously, these stories you've sent in talk about chillin'.
So we're going to unpack them, really get into the nitty-gritty, see if we can make sense of it all.
Yeah, I mean, what is it about these personal encounters with the paranormal that just grabs us like that?
Right, it's like we can't resist a good ghost story, even if it keeps us up at night.
It's that primal fear of the unknown, you know, that sense that there are things out there we just can't explain. It's unsettling, but it's also strangely fascinating.
Definitely. Okay, are you ready to jump into the first one?
Hit me with it.
Okay, so picture this. You and your friends are stuck at this remote cabin in the Canadian wilderness, snowed in.
Oh, I'm already getting nills. Isolated, no power, no cell service. That's like the perfect setup for a scary story.
Right, talk about setting the mood. So they're snowed in, the storm's raging outside, and things start getting really weird inside the cabin. Doors start unlocking and slamming shut on their own.
Classic haunted house vibes, right? You've got the isolation, the storm, the old building. It's practically a recipe for a ghostly encounter.
And then to make things even creepier, one of the friends swears he had a visitation from the spirit of his Uncle Bob, but here's the kicker. He finds out later that Bob actually died that same night.
Whoa, okay, so now we're talking about something more than just a spooky cabin. The timing of that, the fact that he saw his uncle right before finding out about his death, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Like, is there some kind of connection, some way we can sense things beyond our normal perception?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, there are so many documented cases of premonitions, of people sensing things before they happen. It's definitely something we can't just dismiss as coincidence.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second. This next story is less about spectral visitations and more about, pure unexplained chaos.
Oh, this is the one with the trash kitchen, right?
That's the one. Two friends decide to rent this cozy cabin in Wisconsin, hot tub, relax, enjoy nature.
Sounds idyllic. What could go wrong? Right.
Well, they come back from a nice soak in the hot tub to find their kitchen completely trashed. It's like someone or something had a wild party in there.
A poltergeist kegger.
Pretty much. Furniture overturned, food everywhere, you name it. But here's the thing that makes it really weird. Their dog was locked in his crate the whole time.
Oh, so it wasn't just a case of a mischievous canine getting into trouble.
Nope. No sign of forced entry either, which makes it even more baffling. It's like whatever caused the mess just vanished into thin air.
That's what gets me about these poltergeist stories. There's often no clear motive, no rhyme or reason to the chaos they create. It's just pure, unadulterated disruption, and it really messes with our sense of order and control.
Exactly. It's like something's messing with us on purpose just to let us know it can.
I know, right? Okay, I'm ready for the next one. What's up?
Okay, so this one takes us to summer camp. Classic setting for scary stories.
Oh yeah, campfire tales, spooky woods, what's not to love?
Exactly. So we've got two friends playing hide and seek at this camp, and one of them vanishes.
Okay, that's creepy enough already. Kids disappearing in the woods, it's like a primal fear, right?
Totally. But it gets weirder. The other friend swears she saw the missing girl running toward their cabin, but then she got there, and the girl was nowhere to be found. And it wasn't just her. Multiple witnesses claim to have seen her running.
Hold on, multiple witnesses? That changes things. Now we're talking about a shared experience, not just one person's imagination. It's like they all saw the same thing, even though it wasn't really there.
Exactly. So how do you explain that? Was it some kind of group hallucination? A glitch in the matrix? It really makes you question what's real and what's not.
Does it? And that's what's so fascinating about these stories. They force us to confront the limits of our own perception. What if we're only seeing a fraction of what's truly out there?
It's a mind-blowing thought, isn't it?
Totally. And sometimes those glimpses into the unknown can be pretty terrifying.
Okay, let's take a break from the supernatural for a minute and talk about a different kind of scary.
Oh, this is the one about the creepy classmate, right? The one that sent shivers down my spine.
The very same. This one hit close to home for a lot of people, I think. It's about a grad student who keeps getting approached by this classmate who pretends not to know her name, makes weird comments, and just generally makes her feel really unsafe.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me too, because it's not about ghosts or monsters. It's about a real threat that a lot of people, especially women, face on a daily basis.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones we can't explain, but the ones we encounter in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. It's about trusting your gut, setting boundaries, and speaking up when something feels wrong.
Couldn't agree more. All right, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, from haunted cabins and poltergeist kitchens to vanishing campers and creepy classmates. It's been quite a ride so far.
It has, but we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to unpack, so many more layers to these stories.
We'll be back in just a minute to dive even deeper. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back and ready to delve a little deeper into these stories you guys sent in.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that cabin in the woods, the one with the doors unlocking themselves.
The one with Uncle Bob's ghostly visit, right?
Yeah, that's the one. It's like something straight out of a classic ghost story, isn't it?
Total haunted house vibes, right? I mean, you've got the isolated location, the snowstorm raging outside, the old creaky cabin.
And then you add in the fact that one of the friends saw his uncle's ghost right before finding out he died.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. What do you think? Is it possible that he really did see his uncle's spirit?
Well, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, we can't discount the power of suggestion, especially in a situation like that where everyone's already on edge.
True. But the timing of it all is just so eerie. It's like his uncle was trying to reach out to him one last time.
It's definitely possible. There are a lot of theories out there about what happens to our consciousness after we die. Some people believe that our spirits can linger, that we can still connect with loved ones on the other side.
So maybe his uncle's spirit was drawn to him in that moment of vulnerability, in that isolated cabin in the middle of a snowstorm.
It's a compelling idea, and it kind of makes you wonder if maybe we're not as disconnected from the other side as we think we are.
Okay, now I want to go back to that trash kitchen in Wisconsin. That story still has me scratching my head.
Oh yeah, the poltergeist kegger. What do you make of that one?
Honestly, I'm stumped. I mean, I can understand doors unlocking themselves or weird noises, but an entire kitchen being turned upside down with no explanation.
And don't forget, the dog was locked in his crate the whole time.
Right. So we can rule out any four-legged culprits. It's like whatever caused the mess was completely invisible.
And possibly mischievous. It's almost as if some unseen force was just having a bit of fun at their expense.
Or maybe trying to send the message. I don't know. It's just so bizarre.
It is, and that's what makes it so fascinating. Poltergeist activity is one of those phenomena that really defies easy explanation.
Do you think it could have been some kind of buildup of energy? I mean, they were staying in a new place. It was close to Halloween.
It's definitely a possibility. Some researchers believe that poltergeist activity is often linked to strong emotions like anxiety or stress.
So maybe the anticipation of Halloween, the excitement of being in a new place, somehow amplified their energy and created this chaotic outburst?
It's an interesting theory. And it raises the question of whether we're all capable of influencing our environment in ways we don't fully understand.
Okay, let's talk about those summer camp kids playing hide and seek. The ones who saw their friend running towards the cabin, but she was never there.
That one was a real head scratcher, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, multiple people saw her running. It wasn't just one kid's imagination.
Right, which suggests it was something more than just a figment of their imagination.
Exactly. So what was it then? Some kind of shared hallucination, a glitch in the matrix.
I mean, there are theories out there about parallel universes, alternate realities that sometimes intersect with our own.
Whoa, are you saying that the girl they saw running could have been from another dimension?
It's a far-out idea, I know, but it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. I mean, quantum physics suggests that there are multiple realities coexisting with our own.
So maybe they got a brief glimpse into one of those other realities.
It's definitely something to think about, and it kind of makes you wonder what other mysteries might be hidden just beyond our perception.
Okay, so we got ghosts, poltergeists, maybe even interdimensional travelers. And let's not forget the very real, very human threat of a creepy classmate.
Yeah, that story was a stark reminder that sometimes the most unsettling encounters are the ones we have with other people.
It's a reminder to trust our instincts, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to support each other when we feel unsafe.
Absolutely, and that's something we should all be mindful of no matter where we are or who we're with.
Well said. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. We've explored stories of ghosts, poltergeists, and even the possibility of alternate dimensions.
And we've talked about the importance of trusting our intuition, setting boundaries, and speaking up when something feels off.
It's been quite a deep dive, but we're not done yet. We've still got one more segment to go, so stick around. We'll be back in just a minute to wrap things up. Okay, so we're back for our final thoughts on these amazing and sometimes truly unsettling stories.
You know, it's interesting how even though these stories are so diverse, they all seem to touch on this idea of the unexplained. The things that just make us go, huh, that's weird.
Right, like there's this common thread of mystery running through them all. Whether it's a ghostly apparition, a poltergeist having a wild party, or even just that feeling of being watched when you're all alone.
Exactly, it's that sense of, is there something more going on here? That kind of underlying question that keeps us hooked.
So after diving deep into all these stories, do you think we're any closer to understanding whether these events are truly paranormal or just our minds playing tricks on us?
That's the big question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. I mean, some of these stories could be explained away as coincidences or misinterpretations. But then there are those cases like the multiple witnesses seeing that girl at summer camp that really make you wonder.
Yeah, that one's hard to shake off as just a figment of their imagination, especially with so many people seeing the same thing.
Right, and that's what I find so fascinating about this whole topic. It pushes us to consider possibilities beyond our everyday understanding of the world.
Like maybe there are other dimensions out there or ways of perceiving reality that we're not even aware of.
Exactly. It's about opening ourselves up to the idea that there might be more to life than meets the eye.
And even if we can't definitively prove or disprove the existence of ghosts or poltergeists, there's still value in exploring these stories.
Absolutely. They spark our curiosity, challenge our assumptions, and sometimes even help us confront our own fears.
I think that's a great point. It's not just about proving or disproving the paranormal. It's about engaging with the mystery, the unknown.
Exactly. And sometimes just that act of exploration, of questioning and wondering, can be incredibly enriching in itself. It reminds us that there's still so much we don't know, and that's okay.
So to all our listeners out there, keep those stories coming. Keep exploring the unexplained, keep questioning the ordinary, and most importantly, keep sharing your experiences. Because it's through those shared stories, those glimpses into the unknown, that we can learn, grow, and maybe even catch a glimpse of something truly extraordinary. And until next time, keep exploring. Welcome back to another deep dive. You know, when the nights get longer and the shadows grow deeper, our minds tend to wander towards the things that go bum in the night.
It's true. There's something about the darkness, the unknown, that sparks our imagination and awakens those primal fears that have been with us since, well, pretty much forever.
And tonight we're going to explore some of those fears head on. We're diving into a collection of true scary stories, all centered around one classic horror setting: the cabin in the woods.
Oh, the cabin in the wood. It's the perfect setting for a horror story, isn't it? Isolated, secluded, cut off from the rest of the world. It's like a breeding ground for our deepest anxieties.
Exactly. It's where the familiar comforts of civilization fade away and the boundaries between safety and danger become blurred.
And tonight we'll be exploring 5 of these chilling encounters, each one a real experience shared by someone who found themselves face to face with the unknown in a remote cabin in the woods.
So let's dim the lights, gather around, and prepare to be spooked, because these stories are not for the faint of heart. All right, let's get started with our first story. This one takes us back to a man's childhood memory of a family vacation in Colorado. They're staying at a cozy cabin nestled deep in the woods, enjoying the peace and quiet of nature, when suddenly things take a turn for the strange.
Ah, yes. This is the story of the encounter with Patrick, right? This one always gets me. It's just so full of unsettling details that make your skin crawl.
It really is. The story starts out innocently enough. The man remembers exploring the woods with his dad and coming across a friendly stranger named Patrick who seems eager to chat.
But even from the beginning, there are subtle hints that something isn't quite right with Patrick. He's described as nervous and fidgety, constantly wiping sweat from his brow, even though it's a crit autumn day.
Yeah, and he keeps making comments about being there with his family. But as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Patrick is alone at the cabin.
And then there are those questions he asks the young boy about his shoe size, his age, his weight, seemingly innocent inquiries that take on a sinister tone in this context.
It's like those questions are red flags signaling that something's off about this guy. And the boy's unease only grows when Patrick invites him back to his cabin under the pretense of having band-aids for a cut.
Ugh. That's the part that really creeps me out. It's like Patrick is using a classic predator tactic to lure the boy into a vulnerable situation.
Right, it's like those instincts we have about stranger danger screaming at us. But the boy follows Patrick back to the cabin, and once they're inside, things get even weirder.
So tell me, what are some of the details that stood out to you as particularly unsettling in this story?
Well, for me, it was the fact that once they were inside the cabin, Patrick starts making these strange comments about the boy's perfect weight, and even tries to get him to try on clothes.
Oh yeah, I remember that part. It's like Patrick is objectifying the boy, reducing him to a set of physical attributes rather than seeing him as a person. It's dehumanizing and incredibly disturbing.
And then there's the sudden appearance of a woman who Patrick introduces as his wife.
Ah, yes, the wife. But there's something off about her right away. She's pale and withdrawn, and her eyes seem filled with a kind of quiet terror.
Exactly. It's like she's trapped there against her will, or at the very least, she's deeply uncomfortable with the situation.
Her presence raises so many questions. What's her relationship with Patrick? Is she a victim? Is she complicit? The story doesn't give us clear answers, which only adds to the unsettling ambiguity.
Right, it's like the writer is deliberately leaving those details open to interpretation. forcing us to confront the possibility that the truth might be even more horrifying than we can imagine.
It's brilliant storytelling, really. It keeps us on the edge of our seats, wondering what's going to happen next.
So the boy, sensing that something is terribly wrong, manages to make an excuse and escape from a cabin, but as he's running away, he hears Patrick shouting threats at the woman.
It's a chilling ending that leaves us with a lingering sense of dread and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
And it highlights the power of intuition, that gut feeling that something isn't right. We should never ignore those feelings, especially when we're in unfamiliar or potentially dangerous situations.
Absolutely. It's often our instincts that keep us safe, so if something feels off, trust your gut and get out of there. You know that feeling you get when you realize someone's been watching you, like eyes on the back of your neck? It's unsettling, right?
Absolutely, makes your skin crawl. And it's even worse when it happens in a place where you're supposed to feel safe, like your own home.
It's a violation, a breach of that sense of security we crave, especially in our most private spaces.
Which brings us to our next story. This one's about a family staying at a remote cabin for a weekend getaway. The dad wakes up in the middle of the night and something feels off, like something's just not right.
Oh yeah, this one really gets under your skin. It's that feeling of being watched, being observed when you're most vulnerable.
Exactly. So the dad, he gets out of bed and notices that the front door is unlocked. He checks on his family. They're all sound asleep, but then he starts noticing things are out of place, like furniture's been moved. Small things, but enough to make him uneasy.
Imagine that feeling, waking up in the middle of the night, knowing someone's been inside your home, touching your things. It's a nightmare.
It is. And what's interesting is that the dad doesn't immediately wake up his family. He decides to investigate, trying to figure out what's going on without alarming anyone.
That's a tough call, right? You don't want to scare your loved ones, but you also need to assess the danger, make sure they're safe.
So he starts checking the cabin, looking for signs of forced entry, anything that might explain how someone got in. But he finds nothing.
And the longer he searches, the more unsettling details he uncovers.
Yeah, like there were strange noises coming from outside, shadows moving in the darkness. He even finds footprints outside his daughter's bedroom window.
Ugh, that's the part that really sends shivers down my spine. The idea of someone lurking outside your children's window while they sleep, it's terrifying.
It's every parent's worst nightmare. And of course the police are called, but they find no trace of the intruder, no explanation for what happened.
So the family is left with this lingering sense of unease, knowing that someone invaded their space, violated their sense of security, but they'll never know who it was or why they did it.
That's what makes it so disturbing, right? The not knowing, the unanswered questions.
It preys on our minds. It's like a seed of fear that's planted and left to grow. It makes you question everything. Wonder if it could happen again.
Speaking of unanswered questions, our next story is about a group of friends who rent a cabin for a weekend getaway, hoping to escape the stress of everyday life. But instead, they end up facing a different kind of fear.
Yes, this is the one with the hand, right? The hand reaching through the window.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy. So these friends, they're having a good time partying, enjoying their time away, when suddenly in the middle of the night, a hand reaches through one of the windows and starts slapping against the glass.
Imagine that you're in a remote cabin, having a good time, and then, bam, a hand appears out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's like something out of a horror movie. It freaks everyone out. They check the windows, the doors, but there's no sign of anyone outside.
And the weirdest part, they find handprints all over the car they drove up in.
Right, but none of them had touched the car in that way. It's like someone was watching them, toying with them.
Leaving a mark, a reminder that they were there, unseen, unexplained.
And like the previous story, they never find out who was responsible. It remains a mystery, a chilling encounter that leaves them questioning everything they thought they knew about safety and security.
It's a reminder that even when we think we're safe, we're not always in control. There are forces out there that we can't see or understand, and sometimes they choose to make themselves known in the most terrifying ways. It's like the cabin itself becomes a character in these stories, almost like it has a presence, a personality.
You know what I mean? It's almost like the isolation of the cabin setting itself somehow amps up the tension and potential for things to go wrong.
You're absolutely right. Isolation acts as a catalyst. It strips away the familiar comforts and safety nets of everyday life, leaving us exposed and vulnerable. It's in these isolated spaces that our primal fears and anxieties come to the surface.
So in this story, we have a seemingly innocent gathering, a Catholic school party at a cabin in the woods. But the arrival of these uninvited guests changes everything. Windows are smashed, there are shouts and threats, and someone even mentions a gun. It's a sudden eruption of violence that completely shatters the peaceful atmosphere.
What's particularly unsettling about this story is the sense of lawlessness that pervades it. These intruders aren't just there to cause mischief, they're there to disrupt, to intimidate, to instill fear. It's a reminder that even in seemingly safe and structured environments, chaos can erupt without warning.
And what makes it even more chilling is that we never find out who these people are or what their motives were. They disappear into the night, leaving the partygoers traumatized and wondering if they'll ever truly feel safe again.
that unanswered question is what lingers in our minds long after the story is over. It's the not knowing the uncertainty that feeds our fears and allows our imaginations to run wild.
So we've explored 5 very different cabin in the woods stories, each with its own unique brand of fear and suspense. As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what common threads have you noticed running through these tales?
One thing that stands out to me is the recurring theme of boundaries being crossed. It's the violation of physical space, personal boundaries, and societal norms that makes these stories so unsettling.
That's a great observation. It's like the cabin in the woods acts as a kind of liminal space, a place where the rules of everyday life are suspended and anything can happen.
Exactly. It's a place where our sense of security is constantly being challenged and where the line between safety and danger becomes blurred.
These stories also seem to suggest that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones lurking in the woods, but the ones we carry within ourselves, our fears, our anxieties, our own capacity for darkness.
That's a profound insight. I think these stories tap into something very primal within us. They remind us that we're all capable of both great good and great evil, and that the line between the two can be surprisingly thin.
It's a sobering thought, but also a reminder that we need to be vigilant about protecting ourselves and those we care about, both from external threats and from the darkness that can sometimes reside within.
And perhaps these stories also serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation. While it can be tempting to seek solace in secluded places, it's important to remember that true safety lies in connection, in community, in knowing that we're not alone in facing our fears.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. So as you head off into the night, dear listeners, remember to keep a light on, lock your doors, and most importantly, hold your loved ones close. Stay safe out there and sweet dreams. Ever get that feeling, listener, like some places just radiate wrongness? Well, tonight we're diving into a story that'll give you chills, a YouTube video called I Went to a Haunted Cabin. They have a strange list of rules. And the channel, get this, lighthouse horror.
What's so compelling is that it's not just some, campfire tale. It's presented as a first-hand account, adds a layer of authenticity,
Right.
It really gets under your skin.
Like peering into someone's nightmare. So we're going to unpack this video, try to make sense of these bizarre rules surrounding a place called Lake Serenity.
And it starts innocently enough. A family finds this picture-perfect vacation spot online. Lake Serenity, beautiful lake surrounded by pine trees, the ideal family getaway.
Yeah, and initially their experience matches that idyllic picture. They arrive at this cozy Airbnb, a saltbox-style cabin, charming little details like a beach this way sign and a collective of sea glass.
It's the hook, isn't it? Lures you in. False sense of security, making the eventual descent into darkness that much more jarring.
Exactly, and then almost immediately they find it. A handwritten note, not just welcoming them, but laying out the rules for Lake Serenity. And let's just say these aren't your typical cabin guidelines.
Oh no, far more unsettling. The first one that jumped out at me is no boats after dark. Okay, simple enough, right? But then it adds, if you see a light on the lake, immediately call the park ranger.
Yeah, like they're not just forbidding nighttime boating, they're actively afraid of something out there.
Right.
Already, this sense of hidden danger, something lurking beneath the surface.
And it only gets creepier. Rule number 2 talks about feeling something tugging you down in the water.
Okay, now we're getting into nightmare territory. You're telling me the owner actually put that in writing? Like, what kind of vacation spot warns you about being pulled underwater?
It's as if they're acknowledging a very specific and very real threat.
And then there's this whole set of rules about the storm siren. When you hear it, you have to get inside, lock the doors, and no matter what, you cannot come out until the storm passes.
That's the thing. It's so disturbing about these rules. They're not just suggestions. They're like absolute life or death commands. What kind of storm are they really trying to protect people from?
Right, like the storm itself isn't the real danger. It's something that comes with it.
And then you get to the rule about the cordoned off section of the lake. It says, if you see someone crying for help in that area, you have to ignore them.
What? Seriously, it's like they're acknowledging there's danger there, but telling you to just turn a blind eye.
Precisely. And that's what makes this so chilling. Is it safer to help or to follow the rules, even if it means potentially abandoning someone in need?
It's a terrifying dilemma. And the rules just keep getting weirder. There's one about limited lifeguards. And if you see anyone claiming to be one who isn't on the official list, you're supposed to report them.
Imagine you're in trouble, someone comes to your rescue, and your first thought is, wait, are they on the list? That level of paranoia is just unsettling.
Totally. And then there's the rule about reflections in the water. Not just any reflections, but ones that don't belong. like phantom people.
It plays on that primal fear, doesn't it? What lurks beneath the surface, unseen. What if the things we see aren't just reflections, but something trying to break through?
Ugh, my skin is crawling just thinking about it. And then there's this bizarre rule about an optical illusion in the middle of the lake. If you get caught in it, you're supposed to shout "lost boat," not call for help.
Again, this very specific instruction hints at something deeper, something they're trying to avoid attracting. What happens if you do call for help?
Yeah, it's like they've learned to coexist with something dangerous, and these rules are their way of maintaining an uneasy peace.
And finally, the rule that really drives home the point, that there's something very, very wrong in Lake Serenity. If you see any creature larger than a turtle in the water, you're to report it immediately and get out of the water. Not just be careful, but get out.
Right? Not even, oh, we have some harmless native wildlife, here's what they do if you encounter them. This is full on, there are monsters here territory. At this point, I wouldn't even dip my toes in.
It's like they're trying to instill this sense of constant vigilance. You're being watched, judged, and any misstep could have dire consequences.
So we have this family arriving at this seemingly idyllic vacation spot, only to be immediately confronted with these chilling rules. They haven't even experienced anything strange yet, but the atmosphere is already thick with dread.
And that's the genius of this story. The rules themselves become the source of terror, planting a seed of unease that grows with each passing moment.
How do they react to these rules? Do they pack up and leave, or try to ignore the warning signs and enjoy their vacation?
Well, the father in the video admits to being creeped out, but he lets his wife convince him it's just some over-the-top local thing. They try to brush it off, which, let's be honest, is exactly what we'd all probably do in that situation.
It's that classic horror movie trope, ignoring the warning signs. You know it's a bad idea, but you can't help but hope for the best.
And of course, choosing to ignore the warnings only makes the inevitable confrontation with the unknown that much more terrifying.
Right. And the first sign that those rules were more than just eccentric local customs comes when the father decides to go for a swim.
He describes the water as eerily quiet, which immediately creates this feeling of isolation, of being completely alone in a vast and potentially dangerous space. And then he hears it, singing.
Wait, singing? Like someone singing in the water?
Exactly. He describes it as someone humming underwater, right next to him, but when he surfaces, there's no one there.
Okay, that's just straight up creepy. It's like the lake itself is trying to communicate, to lure him in.
It preys on that fundamental fear. Is it something real, or is it just your mind playing tricks on you? He even asks his son if the rules mention anything about singing in the water, trying to rationalize it, to find some explanation within the framework of those bizarre guidelines.
And of course, the rules say nothing about singing, which in a way makes it even more unsettling. It's something outside the established rules, something unknown and potentially dangerous.
And then, as if the singing wasn't enough, he sees it. A pale shape underwater, the size and shape of a person. It vanishes as quickly as it appears, leaving him shaken and doubting his own sanity.
So we've gone from unsettling rules to an eerie underwater encounter. At this point, I'd be packing my bags and heading for the hills.
But they don't. Instead, they try to convince themselves it was nothing, a trick of the light, a figment of their imagination. But the seed of doubt has been planted, and it's about to grow into something much more terrifying.
Because the next incident takes things from unsettling to downright dangerous. Starts with a late-night phone call.
He wakes up in the middle of the night, and he sees a light on the lake, remembers the rule about reporting it to the park ranger. So he makes the call, expecting a simple explanation, but what he gets is a chilling response.
The park ranger doesn't explain anything. He just tells him to get into a room without windows, lock the doors, and don't come out until he calls back. The urgency in his voice is palpable. It sends a wave of fear through the family.
And remember, while he's on the phone, that light is getting closer to the house. It's like whatever is out there knows they've been seen, and it's coming for them.
They huddle in the bathroom, terrified, watching the light from under the door. The suspense is unbearable.
And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the light vanishes. The park ranger calls back, claiming it was just some kids messing around. But his tone is completely different. It's forced, rehearsed, like he's trying to placate them.
The father knows he's lying, but what can he do? He's trapped in this idyllic nightmare, and the rules are the only guide he has. But now, even the park ranger, the supposed authority figure, seems suspect.
This incident throws everything into question. Who is the park ranger really protecting? What does he know about the true nature of Lake Serenity?
And more importantly, what's going to happen to this family if they break the rules?
We're left with more questions than answers, which, of course, is what keeps us hooked.
Right. And the tension just keeps ratcheting up. Despite the father's growing unease, they decide to rent a paddle boat the next day.
Almost as if the lake itself is luring them in. offering a taste of normalcy before plunging them into further chaos.
And chaos is exactly what they find. They get lost in the middle of the lake, caught in that optical illusion described in the rules. The shoreline disappears. They're surrounded by nothing but dark water.
Their kids start to panic, but the father remembers the rule. Shout, "Lost boat, don't call for help."
But before they can even shout, they see it. Waves approaching their boat, something large moving beneath the surface.
This is where the story shuts from subtle psychological chills to full-blown monster horror. The creature slams into their boat again and again until it flips over, sending the family plunging into the icy water.
Okay, this is where I'd officially lose it. Being lost in the middle of a lake is terrifying enough, but knowing there's something out there, something that just attacked your boat.
The stuff of nightmares. And it gets worse. The father, desperate to find his wife, dives back under the water, but what he finds isn't his wife. It's something far more horrifying.
This is the part I keep replaying in my head. What did he see down there?
He describes a pale, almost skeletal figure with empty eye sockets and a grotesque grin. Imagine that for a second, Liliner. You're underwater, disoriented, and you come face to face with that.
I don't even want to imagine it. It's like something out of a Lovecraftian horror. This ancient, inhuman thing lurking in the depths.
Precisely. And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does.
What could be worse than that?
Just as the creature reaches for him, he's pulled to the surface by a lifeguard. He's safe, but forever scarred by what he saw. But here's where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. His wife is already on the rescue raft, safe and sound.
Wait, what? As if she was never in danger. How is that even possible? Did the creature just spare her?
It defies all logic. It's almost as if the rules themselves are somehow protecting certain individuals. Or perhaps there's an even more sinister agenda at play.
Okay, now I'm officially more confused than scared.
That's the beauty of a good horror story, isn't it? Keeps you guessing, keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Right, it's like the story itself is playing by its own set of rules.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to catch up.
And the family, after this terrifying ordeal, are desperate to escape Lake Serenity. But their escape is cut short by the one thing the rules explicitly forbid leaving during a storm.
The storm siren blares and they're trapped. They know something is terribly wrong, but they're forced to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait it out.
It's a terrifying situation, trapped in this cabin, the storm raging outside. Knowing that something sinister is lurking nearby, the tension is palpable.
And in that heightened state of fear, the father makes a chilling discovery. He finds a book titled The History of Lake Serenity, and begins to read about the numerous disappearances, the unsolved mysteries that have plagued the lake for over a century.
The book confirms their suspicions. This place is dangerous, and whatever is out there is ancient and deadly. The book even features a picture of a drowned woman in a black dress, a detail that becomes horrifyingly relevant as the story unfolds.
Okay, now we're adding a layer of history, of generations of fear and tragedy to this already terrifying story. It's like the creature is woven into the very fabric of the lake, its presence spanning centuries.
And as if summoned by the book itself, the unthinkable happens. His wife begins to transform.
Transform? What do you mean?
Her features become gaunt, her skin pale, her eyes sink into shadow. She begins to resemble the creature he saw underwater. Remember, the family is huddled around candlelight during this, making the visual even more disturbing.
Wait, so she's turning into that thing.
It's as if the storm, the very thing the rules warn them about, is somehow fueling the transformation, warping her into something monstrous.
Okay, I'm getting chills just listening to this. So what happens next? They can't just stay in the cabin with whatever she's becoming.
No, they can't. Realizing the danger, the father grabs his children and makes a desperate escape from the cabin. They flee into the storm, breaking the one rule that seemed absolute. It's a gamble, a fight for survival against both the elements and the unknown terror that haunts Lake Serenity.
Wow, welcome back, listener. I don't know about you, but after that first part, I'm both terrified and completely hooked. We've got this idyllic lake that turns out to be a breeding ground for nightmare fuel, a creature straight out of a horror movie, and rules that seem designed to keep people from asking too many questions.
It's like a puzzle box, isn't it? Each piece we uncover just raises more questions. And the transformation of the YouTuber's wife, that really adds a whole new dimension to the horror. It suggests that the creature isn't just a physical threat, but something that can warp and corrupt, something that can take root within a person and twist them into something monstrous.
Right, it's not just about being attacked or killed, it's about becoming something else entirely. Losing your very identity to this thing. Thinking back to those reflections the father saw in the water, Do you think those were just random apparitions, or could they have been glimpses of other victims, people who had already succumbed to the lake's influence?
That's a chilling thought, isn't it? What if those reflections weren't ghosts, but premonitions, showing people the fate that awaits them if they stay too long, if they get too close. It makes you wonder about the true nature of this creature. Is it just a predator driven by hunger, or is there something more sinister at play?
I mean, we've got the singing, which could be interpreted as a lure, and the rule about not calling for help when lost in the optical illusion. It's like it wants to choose its victims, to draw them in on its own terms. And there's the rule about not helping anyone in the cordoned off section of the lake. It's almost like that area is its domain and any interference is met with. Well, we can only imagine what.
Exactly. And let's not forget the park ranger. His role in all of this is still shrouded in mystery, but his behavior speaks volumes. The urgent phone call, warning them about the light, his unconvincing explanation the next morning. It's like he knows more than he's letting on.
Yeah, he definitely gives off some serious "I'm hiding something" vibes. Do you think he's protecting the creature? Maybe he's part of some ancient pact? Or he's been threatened or coerced into keeping silent?
It's possible. Or maybe he's trying to protect the town, the tourists, from a danger he doesn't fully understand. He could be walking a tightrope, trying to appease the creature while also trying to keep people safe.
But wouldn't it be safer to just shut the whole place down? I mean, how many people have to disappear before someone says, hey, maybe this lake is cursed, we should probably stay away?
That's where the rules come in. Remember, they weren't created by the creature, they were created by people. And those rules seem designed to manage the threat, keep the creature contained.
So it's like they've struck some sort of bargain with it. Follow these rules, and it'll mostly leave you alone. But stray from the path, and all bets are off.
It's a terrifying thought, but it would explain why the town hasn't been abandoned. Maybe they believe that as long as they follow the rules, they can coexist with the creature.
But even with the rules, people still disappear. Remember that book the father found, detailing all the unsolved mysteries surrounding the lake? It makes you wonder if the rules are actually effective, or if they're just delaying the inevitable.
And that brings us back to the family's escape. They broke the rules, not just by leaving during the storm, but by surviving the creature's attack. They disrupted the established order, and now the consequences are unknown.
Right. Even though they escaped the cabin, we still don't know what happened to them after. Did they make it out of Lake Serenity? Did the storm protect them? Or did breaking the rules seal their fate?
It's like the story itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. And that brings us to those occurring themes we touched on earlier. Silence, water, and reflections.
They're not just atmospheric details, are they? They seem to be woven into the very fabric of the story, like clues to a deeper meaning.
Exactly. The silence underwater represents that isolation and vulnerability you mentioned earlier. The water itself is the creature's domain, the conduit for its power. And the reflections, those are glimpses into its world, distorted and terrifying.
Like looking through a cracked mirror, seeing a twisted version of reality. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that beauty can hide darkness, that what we see isn't always the truth.
And that's what makes Lake Serenity so terrifying. It promises peace and tranquility, but delivers terror and despair. It's a trap for the unwary, a siren's call that lures people to their doom.
So what does this all mean? What's the takeaway from this story?
It's a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, of things that go bump in the night, things that defy explanation. And sometimes the safest course of action is to simply stay away, to respect the boundaries between our world and the unknown.
It's a chilling thought, but one that resonates deeply with this story. But before we move on to the final part, I want to pose a question to you, listener. Knowing what you know now, would you have followed the rules? Or would you have risked it all to escape Lake Serenity?
Keep that question in mind as we delve into part 3, where we'll explore the lingering questions and unanswered mysteries of Lake Serenity, and offer some final thoughts on this chilling tale.
We're back, listener, for the final part of our deep dive into Lake Serenity. And you know what's been sticking with me? It's that question of choice. What if the family had stayed in the cabin? Would they have survived? Did running into the storm seal their fate?
It's impossible to know for sure, but it raises the question of whether the rules were actually protecting people or just controlling them, keeping them trapped in a cycle of fear and obedience.
Like a twisted social experiment. Except the consequences are far more terrifying than just getting kicked off the island.
Exactly, and it makes that final scene even more poignant. The father and his children fleeing into the storm, the wife left behind transformed into something monstrous. It's a stark reminder that sometimes even following the rules isn't enough.
And let's talk about the storm itself. It seems to be more than just a natural phenomenon, doesn't it? There's this feeling that it's connected to the creature, maybe even a source of its power.
Right, because the rules emphasize staying inside during the storm, not just for safety from the elements, but almost like they're afraid of what might happen if people are exposed to it.
Maybe the storm amplifies the creature's influence, allowing it to reach beyond the lake and into the homes. into the minds of its victims.
That's a chilling thought. It transforms the storm from a force of nature into an extension of the creature's will, a tool for its sinister purposes.
And if that's the case, then the transformation of the wife makes even more sense. It's like the storm acted as a catalyst, breaking down the barriers between her and the creature, allowing it to take hold.
And remember those missing people from the history book? What if the storm was responsible for their disappearances? Maybe it wasn't the creature itself that claimed them, but the storm's chaotic energy warping and consuming them.
It paints a horrifying picture. The storm as this chaotic force that reshapes reality, bending people and places to its will, and the creature as a manifestation of that chaos, the embodiment of its power.
It's a theme that resonates throughout the story, the blurring of boundaries, the merging of the natural and the supernatural. The lake itself is a perfect example. It appears beautiful and serene, yet it harbors a dark and deadly secret.
And those reflections we keep coming back to, they're not just visual tricks. They're symbolic of that blurred reality. The things we see aren't always what they seem, and what lies beneath the surface can be far more terrifying than we could ever imagine.
Exactly. And that's the true horror of Lake Serenity. It's a place where our perception of reality is constantly challenged, where the rules we rely on for safety and order can be broken at any moment.
It leaves us with this unsettling feeling that we're never truly in control, that there are forces at play beyond our comprehension, forces that can reshape our world in terrifying ways.
And the story doesn't offer any easy answers. It leaves us with more questions than answers, prompting us to confront our own fears and anxieties about the unknown.
So listener, as we reach the end of our deep dive into the mysteries of Lake Serenity, what are your final thoughts? What lingers in your mind? Is it the creature, the rules, the park ranger? Or is it something more intangible, a sense of unease, a creeping dread that stays with you long after the story's over?
Because I think that's the power of a truly effective horror story. It's not just about jump scares or gore. It's about planting a seed of doubt in our minds, making us question the nature of reality and our place in it.
It's about reminding us that there are still mysteries in this world, things that we can't explain or control. And sometimes the best we can do is to simply acknowledge their existence and tread carefully.
So next time you see a pristine lake, a secluded cabin, an idyllic vacation spot, remember Lake Serenity, remember the rules, remember the creature, and remember that sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets.
And that's our deep dive for this week. We hope you enjoyed it, or at least survived it. Join us next time as we plunge into another fascinating and unsettling topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. All right, so welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
Yeah, always exciting to be back.
This week, we're going to be looking at some really creepy stories all about cabins and encounters that happen at remote cabins.
Oh, yeah, I love a good cabin in the woods story.
Yeah, me too.
There's just something about them that's just so inherently unsettling.
Yeah, like that feeling of being isolated and surrounded by darkness. You never know what might be lurking out there, right?
Exactly. And it just like plays on all those primal fears, you know, the fear of the unknown, fear of the dark. It's like going back to a time when we were really vulnerable to the elements and to predators and things.
Yeah, it's like stepping back in time into a different world almost.
Totally, and I think that's part of the appeal of these stories. They take us out of our comfort zones and force us to confront those deep-seated fears that we all have.
Yeah, and especially, you know, we're looking at stories that are listener submitted from the Darkness Prevails YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, those are always good ones.
And so people are telling their own stories, you know, and they all center around these remote cabins and the things that go bump in the night. So it's like we're getting these firsthand accounts of like actual encounters.
Oh yeah, those are the best. I mean, there's something about feeling it straight from the person who experienced it that just makes it so much more real.
Yeah, it's not just like somebody reading a story from a book. It's like this actually happened to someone. You know, so you really get that sense of like, oh my God, this could happen to me too.
Right, and that's the thought that keeps you up at night.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into our first story. This one's called Full Moon Brings the Winged Things. And it's from a woman named Erica.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Erica's a teenager at the time, and she's not exactly thrilled about this family trip to their cabin in New Mexico. You know, classic teenage angst, right?
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah, like she'd rather be anywhere else than stuck in the middle of nowhere with her family.
Totally. I mean, who hasn't felt that way as a teenager?
So they arrive at the cabin, and it's like the forest just goes silent. It's this unsettling stillness that kind of sets the stage for the whole story, you know?
Yeah, it's like even nature itself knows something's about to go down.
Right, like the woods are holding their breath, waiting for something to happen.
Exactly.
And then she hears this whooshing sound. It's faint at first, but definitely not a natural sound.
Oh, I don't like that.
Like almost like big wings beating, but slower, more deliberate.
Okay, yeah, that's creepy.
And along with the whooshing, there's this clicking sound.
Clicking? Like what?
Yeah, she describes it as almost like echolocation.
Oh, like a bat.
Yeah, but much louder, more intense. So you already get this sense that whatever's out there is big and it's using sound to navigate.
Okay, yeah, I'm already getting chills just thinking about it.
Me too. And then later that night, she sees it. It's flying through the trees, carrying something in its claws.
Oh my god, what is it?
Some kind of animal, she says, and it's making this awful squealing sound.
Oh, that's just horrifying.
Yeah, it's like you can feel the terror of this poor animal being carried off by this thing, you know?
Yeah, and the fact that she doesn't really describe what the creature looks like, that just makes it even scarier.
Right, like our imaginations just take over and we can picture the most terrifying creature we can think of.
Yeah, it's definitely like playing on that fear of the unknown again.
The next day, her dad and brother go out to investigate, and they find evidence that whatever this creature is, it's not just some harmless bat.
What did they find?
Blood. A lot of it. And deer remains that have been dug up and like half eaten.
Oh, okay. So this isn't just some like cute little bat. This is something much more sinister.
Yeah, it's like the story takes this turn from creepy to truly disturbing. Like this is a predator and it's capable of taking down large prey.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing about these kinds of stories. They often start with something small and seemingly innocuous, you know, like a strange sound or a fleeting glimpse of something. But then as the story unfolds, you realize that there's something much more dangerous and sinister at play.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the last night of their trip, under a full moon, Erica sees it again. This time it's perched in a tree, just watching her.
Oh god, that's terrifying.
She says its eyes were glowing red and it was just staring at her.
Like it knew he was there.
Yeah, like it was sizing her up, you know.
Oh, that's creepy.
And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it takes off into the night.
Leaving her with more questions than answers.
Right, like what was this thing? Where did it come from and why was it watching her?
It's like, I just wanted to let her know that it was there, you know, like a warning almost.
Yeah, like a reminder that even in the supposed safety of a cabin, you're never truly alone in the wilderness.
And that there are things out there that we just don't understand.
It's like a glimpse into a hidden world, a world where the rules of nature are different, and where creatures like this bat-like thing are real.
And that's what makes these stories so captivating, right? They make us question what we think we know about the world.
Yeah, they make us realize that there's still so much mystery out there, so much that we don't understand.
And that's a good thing, I think. A little bit of mystery keeps life interesting.
Totally. But maybe not too much mystery, especially when it comes to giant bat creatures in the woods.
Yep, on that I agree.
All right, so let's move on to our next story. This one's called An Icy Cold Haunting, and it takes us to the snowy peaks of Colorado.
Sounds cozy.
Not exactly.
Oh.
This is a story about a family's winter getaway that turns into a chilling encounter with the unexplained. Let's just say they'll be wishing for those warm summer nights by the end of this one.
Okay, bring on the chills. Okay, so paint me a picture. What's the cabin like? What's the family like?
So, it's a pretty typical setup, you know, mom, dad, couple kids, and they're all excited for this like winter wonderland getaway, right?
Okay.
They get to the cabin and it's a blizzard outside, snow's coming down hard.
Oh, wow.
But as soon as they step inside, there's this weird feeling like something's just not quite right.
Oh, I hate that feeling.
Yeah, it's like this underlying sense of unease that just kind of hangs in the air. And they start noticing these little things like a crucifix that's supposed to be on the wall above the fireplace is missing.
Oh, spooky.
Yeah, and there's this like strange smudge on the wall in one of the bedrooms. Almost like soot, but they can't figure out where it came from.
Okay, yeah, those are definitely red flags.
And then they start to get really creepy.
Okay, tell me more. Like, what happens?
So the next morning, they wake up and there are these huge claw marks on the porch. Like something tried to rip its way in.
Claw marks, like from what?
They don't know. They check all around the cabin, but there are no animal tracks or anything.
Oh, that's freaky.
Yeah. And then throughout the day, they keep hearing these banging noises coming from the attic.
Oh, no, I'd be out of there.
Yeah, but it's a blizzard outside, so they're kind of stuck.
Right.
And the lights start flickering, the radio turns on by itself. It's like all these classic haunted house tropes, you know?
Yeah, it's like the cabin's coming alive, like it doesn't want them there.
Right. And then one night, the husband's up late reading, and he sees it.
What, he sees what?
The shadowy figure standing in the loft, just watching him.
Oh, God, no, I hate those.
It's gone in a flash, but he swears he saw it. This tall, dark figure with these glowing eyes.
So they decide to leave after that?
Yeah, the next morning they pack up and get out of there as fast as they can.
Smart move.
But before they go, they talk to the grandfather who owns the cabin.
And what does he say?
He tells them that there have been rumors of a haunting associated with the cabin and the land for years.
Oh, so it's like a known thing.
Yeah, like people in the area have always whispered about something strange going on up there, but nobody really knows the full story.
Oh man, that just adds another layer of creepiness to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like this place has a dark history, and whatever's haunting it, it's been there for a long time.
And it doesn't want to be disturbed.
Right, so let's switch gears a bit and head down to the Ozarks. This next story, called Not a Bear, is about a man who goes to a remote cabin seeking solace after a string of personal losses.
Oh, that sounds rough. I hope he finds some peace and quiet at least.
Well, he finds something, but it's not exactly peace and quiet.
Oh, this sounds ominous.
Yeah, he starts to encounter something in the woods around his cabin, something that defies explanation.
So what does he see?
At first, it's just these little things like strange tracks around the cabin.
Okay, tracks, like animal tracks.
Yeah, but they're not like any animal tracks he's ever seen before, and he's a pretty experienced outdoorsman. And then there are these claw marks on the trees, like something's been sharpening its claws on the bark.
Okay, now that's creepy.
And he starts hearing these weird sounds at night, like grunting and unnarding, but it doesn't sound like any animal he knows.
Oh god, that would freak me out.
Yeah, and then one night, he catches a glimpse of it moving through the trees.
And what does it look like?
He doesn't get a great look at it. It's dark and the thing's moving fast.
Right.
But he says it has this patchy fur, almost like a mangy dog, and this long, hog-like snout.
Okay, I'm picturing some kind of like werewolf pig hybrid or something.
Yeah, it's definitely not anything he's ever seen before.
And so what does he do? Does he try to get a closer look?
He tries to stay away from it at first. He figures whatever it is, it's best to just let it be.
Probably a good idea.
But one night, he's coming back to the cabin after chopping some firewood. And he hears this rustling in the bushes behind him. And then he sees it, this thing just standing there watching him.
Oh no.
And then it charges at him.
Oh my
He
god.
dropped the firewood and just runs like full speed back to the cabin.
I bet.
He can hear this thing right behind him crashing through the underbrush like it's right on his heels.
Man, that's terrifying.
He gets to the cabin, fumbles with the lock, throws the door open, and slams it shut behind him.
Oh, thank God.
And he can hear this thing like snarling and clawing at the door, trying to get...
Like it just wants to get its claws on him.
Yeah, and he's just standing there, heart pounding, listening to this thing rage outside.
So what happens next? Does it eventually go away?
Yeah, after a while, the noises stop, and he doesn't see the creature again.
Oh, thank goodness. But I bet he didn't get much sleep after that.
Probably not. It's like this encounter really shakes him to his core, you know?
I can imagine it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world.
Exactly. Now, from the shadowy Ozarks, let's travel north to the peaceful woods of Minnesota.
Okay, a change of scenery.
This story is something wrong with nature. It's a little different. It's not so much about one specific creature, but more about this pervasive feeling that something's just not right in the woods.
Oh, okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Yeah, like it's almost like the whole ecosystem is off balance, like something's disrupted the natural order.
Yeah, it's like a creeping sense of dread that just seeps into everything.
That's a good way to put it.
So this guy, he's drawn to this secluded cabin in Minnesota, looking for peace and quiet and, the chance to reconnect with nature.
Okay.
But right away, he starts noticing that the animals are acting weird.
Okay, in what way? Give me some examples.
Well, like he sees deer staring at him for like way too long, like unnaturally long periods. And their eyes look kind of blank, almost lifeless.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah, and the raccoons, they're not afraid of him at all. Like he'd come right up to the cabin trying to get in.
Old raccoons.
Yeah, it's like they've lost their fear of humans, which is never a good sign.
Right.
And he even sees these crows, like just perched on branches, totally still, like they're frozen in time.
Oh, that's really weird.
Yeah, it's like they're in some kind of trance or something.
Like they've been hypnotized?
Yeah, something like that. It's really unsettling.
So it's not just like one animal acting strange, it's like all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And to make things even creepier, he sets up some trail cameras around the property, hoping to catch some footage of the local wildlife.
Okay.
But when he checks the footage, it's even more disturbing.
What does he see?
Well, the animals are all staring directly into the camera, like right into the lens.
Oh, like they know they're being watched?
Yeah, but it's not just like a quick glance. They hold the gaze for minutes at a time, just staring, unblinking.
Oh God, that's just wrong.
Yeah, it's really freaky. It's like they're looking right through you, like they can see into your soul or something.
It's like they're trying to send a message.
And then one evening, he's walking back to the cabin, and he sees it.
Okay, he sees what? The thing that's been watching him.
It's hard to describe. He says it was like a wolf, but all emaciated and kind of sickly looking. Its fur was all patchy and matted, and its eyes were cloudy like it was blind or something.
Oh, that's disturbing.
Yeah, and it was moving really strangely, like it was gliding across the ground, almost like it was floating.
Okay, now that's just creepy.
It gets closer and closer to him, and he's like frozen in fear. He doesn't know what to do.
Oh God, I'd be terrified.
But then, just when he thinks it's going to attack, it just vanishes, like it was never there.
Like it just disappeared into thin air.
Yeah, and he's left standing there, heart pounding, wondering if he just imagined the whole thing.
Oh man, that would mess with your head.
Yeah, it really makes you question what's real and what's not, like what's actually out there in the woods.
It's like the line between the natural and the supernatural just gets totally blurred.
Exactly. And then our final story takes us up to the frozen shores of Lake Nipigon in Canada.
Oh, okay, a change of scenery again. What's this one about?
This one's called the Wendigo of Lake Nipigon, and it's steeped in Native American folklore.
Oh, okay, I'm familiar with the Wendigo legend. Pretty creepy stuff.
Yeah, so this story starts with a group of friends on a winter trip to a remote cabin on the lake.
Okay, classic setup.
Right away, they start noticing some weird things.
Like what kind of weird things?
Well, first, they find these strange footprints in the snow around the cabin.
Footprints, like animal tracks or something?
They're human-like, but way too long and narrow, and the stride is way too big.
Okay, that's freaky. Sounds like Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's definitely unsettling.
And what else did they see? Anything else?
Yeah, then they find a dead hare near the woods.
Okay.
But it's not just dead, it's like mangled. Like its bones are all twisted and broken in unnatural ways.
Oh God, that's awful.
Yeah, it's like something really messed it up, like it was playing with it before it killed it.
Okay, I'm starting to get the chills here. The Wendigo, right?
And yeah, that's exactly what they start thinking about, the local legend of the Wendigo, this creature that roams the woods in winter, preying on humans.
Yeah, the Wendigo is no joke. It's like the ultimate embodiment of winter's dark side.
Right, and as the story goes on, things get progressively creepier.
What happens? Give me the highlights.
Okay, so they start hearing these weird crying sounds at night, like someone's out in the woods, sobbing and wailing.
Oh God, no, that would freak me out.
And they constantly feel like they're being watched, like something's out there in the trees, observing them.
Yeah, I'd be looking over my shoulder constantly.
One night, they hear these running footsteps outside the cabin, and then these guttural cries, like something's in pain.
Oh.
Two of the guys go out to investigate, but the trail leads into the woods and just stops.
Like whatever it was, it just vanished.
Yeah, and they're left standing there in the dark, feeling totally vulnerable.
I bet.
They decide they've had enough, and they pack up and leave.
Probably a good idea.
But as they're loading the car, they see it one last time, this tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the trees, just watching them.
Oh my God, no way.
And then it's gone, just like that.
Leaving them with that lingering sense of dread.
Exactly. So those are just a few of the many creepy cabin encounters we've been exploring.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground tonight.
And it's fascinating how these stories, even though they're all different, they share these common threads, these themes of isolation, vulnerability, and the unknown.
Right, it's like they're tapping into something primal, something deep within us that recognizes the power and the mystery of the natural world.
And the fact that these stories are all listener submitted, it just makes them that much more real and believable. Like it could happen to any of us.
Yeah, and I think that's why these stories are so popular. They make us question what we think we know about the world and remind us that there's still so much out there that we don't understand.
And maybe that's a good thing, right? A little bit of mystery keeps life interesting.
Absolutely, but maybe not too much mystery, especially when you're alone in a cabin in the woods.
Well said. So until next time, stay safe out there and maybe leave a nightlight on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Always a pleasure.
Okay, so those cabin horror stories that keep you up at night? Those ones that make you think twice about that secluded getaway? Well, we're diving headfirst into those tonight.
We're talking those creepy YouTube and Reddit tales, the ones set in those rustic cabins deep in the woods where things go bump in the night.
Exactly. It's like the promise of peace and quiet turns into a breeding ground for something sinister. We're talking eerie encounters, strange events, and creatures lurking just beyond the firelight.
And what's so fascinating about these stories is how they tap into those primal fears we all have. You know, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the dark, those things that make your heart race when you're alone in a quiet place.
Right, you're isolated, surrounded by the wilderness, and suddenly every creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves outside becomes a potential threat.
Exactly. The isolation, the darkness, it all creates this perfect canvas for our anxieties to run wild.
It's like the woods themselves become a character almost, full of unseen eyes and hidden threats, just waiting for the right moment to strike.
And one of the most powerful tools these stories use is sound. It's not just the howling wind or the crackling fire, it's those unsettling, unexplainable noises that really get under your skin.
It's true. Sound can bypass our rational mind and tap directly into our instincts. Like think about that feeling you get when you hear a twig snap in the woods at night. Your heart starts racing even before you consciously process what you're hearing.
Right, your body's already reacting, preparing for a potential threat.
And that's what makes sound such a powerful tool in horror. It triggers that primal fight or flight response even before we know what we're dealing with.
Exactly, and in these cabin stories, those unsettling sounds are often the first sign that something isn't right. Like in that story, Forest Howl, where this family on vacation is haunted by this bizarre howl.
Oh yeah, that one's creepy. It's not a wolf, not a coyote, something else entirely. And it seems to target specific members of the family, almost as if it's playing with them, you know?
It's like it's toying with their sanity, pushing them to the edge.
Yeah, and that element of the unknown is crucial, isn't it? I mean, our brains crave patterns, so when we encounter a sound that we can't explain, it throws us off balance.
Absolutely. It makes us question our senses, our sanity even, and that's where the fear really takes root.
And then you have stories like, what was it, The Lake Secret? That one was just full of these visceral sounds, bone-jarring, clicking, metallic grinding, and this horrible moaning, like a dog in pain.
Ugh, that one was rough. The way those sounds are described, you can almost feel them vibrating in your chest.
I know, right? It's like the writer's trying to make you experience the horror firsthand through your own senses.
And it works. It really draws you into the story, making the fear feel real and immediate.
Okay, so we've talked about these unsettling sounds, but there's another layer to these stories that really gets under my skin. The way they blur the lines between reality and hallucination.
Yeah, that's a classic horror technique, making you question what's real and what's not. You're never quite sure if the characters are genuinely experiencing something supernatural or if the isolation is driving them mad.
It's like that saying, the loneliest place in the world is in your own mind. When you're cut off from everyone and everything you know, your thoughts can start to turn against you.
And that's what makes psychological horror so chilling. It taps into our own uncertainties about the nature of reality. Can we trust our senses? Can we trust our own minds?
Right. And those questions become even more terrifying when you're isolated, alone with your thoughts and fears.
It's like the wokeness itself starts to seep into your mind, whispering doubts and amplifying your anxieties.
Like in that story, The Island in the Lake, where the narrator is haunted by these vivid nightmares. But then those nightmares start to bleed into his waking life.
And the ending. Ugh, the implication that whatever was haunting him in the lake may have followed him home. Pure nightmare fuel.
I know. It's that lingering fear, that sense that something is still watching you even after you've escaped the immediate danger. It's like the horror doesn't end with the story.
Exactly. It stays with you, making you question everything you thought you knew about the world, about the boundaries between the real and the unreal.
Okay, so we've talked about unsettling sounds and the blurring of reality. But then things start to escalate in some of these stories, right? The creatures go from lurking in the shadows to becoming more aggressive, more direct in their threats.
Yeah, that's where the tension really starts to ramp up. You go from that creeping sense of dread to a more immediate, visceral fear.
It's like the threat is no longer abstract. It's something tangible, something with the power to harm you directly.
And that shift from the unseen to the seen is a crucial turning point in horror. It forces the characters and the reader to confront the reality of the danger.
Like in Carnivorous Deer Man. That story still gives me chills. This group of friends is trapped in a cabin, stalked by this creature that sounds like a deer, but it's obviously something far more sinister.
Right, with sharp teeth and this unnatural hunger, and the way it uses the deer call, distorting it into something menacing. Just thinking about it makes my skin crawl.
I know, it's like it's mocking them, using their own expectations against them.
Exactly. It takes something familiar, something we associate with nature and beauty, and twist it into something grotesque and terrifying.
And then there's that other story, the Rude and Terrifying Awakening, was it? That one really plays on that vulnerability we all feel when we're asleep.
Yeah, that one's messed up. This young boy wakes them to find this creature with glowing red eyes peering at him through the window.
And it crawls into bed with him. I mean, talk about violating a safe space.
That story really taps into our most primal fears, the fear of being hunted, of being preyed upon while we're most vulnerable.
It's a reminder that even in our homes, in our beds, we're not entirely safe. The darkness can find a way in.
And sometimes what lurks in that darkness is far more terrifying than we can imagine. Welcome back to our deep dive into those unsettling cabin horror stories.
You know, those tales that make you question just what might be lurking out there in the dark.
And as we dig deeper into these stories, it really makes you think about the power of isolation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What is it about being alone in a cabin, surrounded by the wilderness, that makes us so susceptible to fear?
I think it's that feeling of being cut off, disconnected from everything you know and everyone you love.
Yeah, like you're standing outside the boundaries of safety and security, suddenly you're on your own.
Exactly. And all those things we rely on for comfort technology, communication, the feeling of being connected to the outside world, they're all gone.
It's like you're stripped bare, exposed to something primal, something that's been buried deep inside us for centuries.
And that primal fear often expresses itself through, that feeling of being watched.
Oh yeah, that classic horror trope. You're alone, but you just can't shake the feeling that something is out there, watching you, waiting.
It's like those stories we talked about earlier with the unsettling sounds. It plays on our paranoia, our instinct to scan for threats.
Right, like you're back in the days of our ancestors, huddled around a fire, trying to pierce the darkness with your eyes, always on edge, waiting for something to jump out from the shadows.
And in that state of heightened awareness, every little sound, every movement in the darkness takes on a sinister meaning.
Oh yeah, like in The Stalker in the Woods, those friends on their camping trip, terrorized by that man in the back suit.
Right. Trying to grab one of the girls through the car window. Ugh. And that part where they realize someone was watching them from the woods earlier, it just sends chills down your spine.
It's a reminder that the monsters in these stories aren't always, supernatural creatures or mythical beasts.
Sometimes the most terrifying threats are all too human.
Yeah, and that's almost scarier in a way because it feels more real, more plausible.
It's like, if it happened to them, it could happen to me. That thought just stays with you.
Okay, but let's circle back to those supernatural creatures for a second. I was particularly creeped out by the stories where people actually saw those beings, like in This Is Why I Don't Go to Summer Camp. Those girls tormented by that ear-splitting sound every night.
And then they see that figure, that humanoid creature with the abnormally long arms hiding under their cabin.
It's like something out of a nightmare, something that just defies our understanding of biology, of what should be physically possible.
It really makes you question what might be out there, lurking just beyond our perception.
It's like a glimpse into a hidden world, a world that operates by different rules we can't even comprehend.
And it makes you wonder, what is it about these isolated places that draws these creatures?
Right. Are they attracted to the energy of those places? Is it some sort of portal to another dimension or something?
It's a chilling thought that these places, these cabins in the woods, might be points of convergence between our world and something else.
Okay, so we talked about creepy sounds, that feeling of being watched, and even encounters with terrifying creatures. But some of these stories go even deeper, right? They start to explore these themes of psychological manipulation, even possession.
That's where things get really disturbing. It's not just about physical threats anymore. It's about losing control, about your mind and body being invaded by something sinister.
Like in The White Thing, that story was just full of unsettling details, those strange smells, the disembodied voices, and then that tall, white creature watching them from the shadows.
And that part where one of the guys feels it crawl into bed with him, oof, that's just nightmare-inducing.
I know, right? It's like this entity is deliberately trying to break them down, to mess with their minds.
And that description of the creature, emotionless alien, it's like it doesn't operate on a human level. It has its own motives, its own agenda that we can't even begin to understand.
And it's not just physical possession either, right? In some stories, it seems like the characters are being mentally influenced. Like their thoughts and actions are being manipulated by some unseen force.
Like, what was that one called? The Palestinian Dogman. The way the narrator's cousin seems to have this weird connection to those creatures, almost like he's in league with them, it's just unsettling.
Yeah, it makes you question the nature of evil, doesn't it? Is it something external, something that infects us from the outside? Or is it something that's already inside us, waiting for the right moment to surface?
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of these stories, the intelligence and cunning that some of these creatures display.
It's like they're not just mindless monsters acting on instinct. They seem to have a plan, a strategy.
Exactly. They're playing with their victims, toying with them, enjoying the fear they inflict.
Like in that story, The Cabin in the Woods, that 12-year-old boy who keeps seeing that strange man lurking around the cabin, and then the knocking on the door in the middle of the night.
And the gunshot. And that chilling image of the man walking away with the hunting knife.
It's just so calculated, so deliberate. It's not just random violence. It's a carefully orchestrated campaign of terror.
And the fact that the story is told from the boy's perspective makes it even creepier.
I know, right? Like, children are supposed to be innocent, protected from the darkness of the world. But in these stories, they're often the ones who are most attuned to the supernatural, to the things that adults try to ignore.
It's like they have a sixth sense, a way of seeing the world that we've lost as we've grown older.
So we've got the psychological impact of isolation, that feeling of being watched, the themes of possession, and now the intelligence of these creatures. But what really stays with you after reading these stories is that lingering sense of unease. Like even after the immediate danger has passed, something still feels off.
Yeah, that's the hallmark of truly effective horror. It's not just about jump scares or gore. It's about creating an atmosphere, a mood that seeps into your subconscious and just stays there.
It's like a seed of doubt that's been planted in your mind. You start to question everything you thought you knew about the world, about the boundaries between the real and the unreal.
Like in Grandpa's Best Friend, that story was so full of twists and turns. The claw marks on the cabin, the grandpa acting strangely, and then that massive, terrifying creature.
And the ending, where he escapes, but he's still left with all those unanswered questions.
It's like the horror doesn't end with the story. It spills over into your own thoughts, your own reality.
It's a reminder that the world is a much stranger and perhaps a much darker place than we'd like to believe.
And that's the power of a well-crafted horror narrative. It challenges our perceptions, forces us to confront the unknown, and reminds us that there are things out there, things we may never fully understand.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into those spine-chilling cabin horror stories.
Those tales that remind us, that the darkness isn't always where we expect it.
And as we wrap things up, I really want to talk about what these stories reveal about us, about our human nature, our vulnerabilities, our fears, and also our capacity for courage in the face of the unimaginable.
That's a great point. One thing that really struck me as we were going through these stories is how often the characters ignore those warning signs, those red flags that something's not quite right.
Oh yeah, totally. It's like they have blinders on. They just refuse to acknowledge the possibility of danger, even when it's staring them right in the face.
It's a classic horror trope, right? But I think it also reflects something very real about human psychology. That tendency we have to rationalize the unexplainable, to cling to our familiar worldview, even when the evidence suggests something much darker is going on.
It's like we have this built-in resistance to the truly uncanny. We'd rather dismiss something as a trick of the imagination or a coincidence than face the possibility that something truly unsettling is happening, something that just doesn't fit into our neat little box of understanding.
Exactly. It's easier to deny than to confront, especially when the alternative is something that challenges our fundamental understanding of, how the world works.
Like in that story, The Haunted Cabin by the River, the narrator's friend living in that cabin that's practically a magnet for paranormal activity.
Right. Doors slamming, disembodied voices, but the friend just shrugs it all off like it's just part of everyday life.
Yeah, it's almost as if he's made a pact with the darkness, like he's accepted those unsettling occurrences as the price of living in that isolated place.
And in a way, that's even more terrifying than the ghosts or the creatures themselves, isn't it? That normalization of the abnormal, that blurring of the lines between the rational and the irrational.
Totally. It makes you wonder, at what point do we become so accustomed to the strange that we lose the ability to recognize true danger?
Right. When does the extraordinary become so ordinary that we no longer even question it? That's a scary thought.
Okay, so we've got that whole ignoring the warning signs thing, but another element that popped up in a few of these stories was the role of dreams and premonitions.
Ah, yes. Dreams, those windows into the subconscious where our deepest fears and anxieties play out.
Exactly. And in these stories, dreams often become intertwined with reality, blurring the lines between the two.
Like in Something Crawled Into Our Cabin, the narrator having that vivid dream about walking in the woods and then waking up to find himself still in the cabin, but everything feels different, off somehow.
I remember that one. It's like that dream seeped into reality, leaving this unsettling residue.
Right. It makes you question, are these dreams just, our anxieties playing out? Or are they something more? Are they warnings, glimpses into a hidden world trying to guide us away from danger?
It's a question that has fascinated and terrified people for centuries, hasn't it? The idea that our dreams might be connected to something larger, something beyond our understanding.
Absolutely. And these stories tap into that primal fear, that sense that there are forces at play that we can't see or control.
Okay, so we've talked about ignoring warning signs, the role of dreams, and of course all those terrifying encounters with creatures and otherworldly phenomena. But, amidst all the fear and uncertainty, these stories also highlight something else: the resilience of the human spirit.
That's true. Despite the terror, the characters often find a way to fight back, to confront their fears, and find the strength to survive.
Like in Happenings at Camp, that young boy at summer camp dealing with all those strange occurrences. At first, he tries to ignore it to convince himself it's all in his head, but eventually he has to face the reality of the situation.
And it's in that moment of acceptance, that decision to confront the fear rather than succumb to it, that he starts to reclaim his power,
It's like those stories are telling us that running from our fears only makes them stronger. We have to face them head on in order to overcome them.
Absolutely. And sometimes that confrontation can lead to unexpected strength and resilience. It's in those moments of vulnerability, when we're stripped bare of our illusions of safety, that we discover our true potential.
Like in my summer camp ghost story, that girl, tormented by those alarms going off on her iPod, seeing that creature with the glowing red eyes.
But instead of panicking, she decides to stay awake, to face whatever it is.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have fears, anxieties that lurk in the shadows of our minds. But we also have the capacity to confront those fears, to find that inner strength that allows us to push through.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these cabin horror stories, I hope our listeners will take away that message of resilience, that reminder that even in the darkest of nights, the human spirit can find a way to shine through.
Absolutely. And I hope they'll also remember to keep a flashlight handy, just in case. You never know what might be lurking out there in the dark.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and sweet dreams.